Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's LA Torero Club event, Changing Lanes, Maneuvering Your Career Pivot, featuring Tom Roth, class of 2012. My name is Megan O'Rourke, and I'm the Associate Director of Regional Programs for the Office of Alumni Relations at the University of San Diego. Events such as this were designed with the Alumni Association's mission in mind to engage and enrich the Torero community for life. We do so every year through in-person and virtual events, interactive webinars, and lifelong learning opportunities. We hope today's program provides you some insight into how to navigate a career pivot and hope it leaves you with your questions answered, as well as some items to try on your own. While I see many Toreros from LA on the call, I also see that we have alumni joining us from all over the country. Thank you for attending today's event, and thank you to those who will be watching at a later time. Some housekeeping items before we begin. We are recording this event through Zoom webinar and have activated the Q&A feature. If you have any questions for Tom, please feel free to put them in the Q&A feature and we will address them throughout the event, time permitting. Today's recording will also be available on the USD Alumni Association's YouTube channel later this week. At this time, I would like to welcome Brian Rosario, LA Torero Club President and member of the class of 1999, to turn on his camera and take it away. Brian?
Thank you, Megan, and thank you all for coming on tonight for our event. I'm very pleased to welcome Tom Roth. And if there's any questions, please, like Megan said, add them to our Q&A. Just as a little introduction to Tom, he graduated USD in 2012. He grew up in the Pacific Northwest. He's had jobs in Seattle, Washington, D.C., now back in LA. He's been in the industries of event planning, nonprofits, consulting, photography, and now piloting, which we will get to shortly. He stayed active as an alum, being on scholarship essay reader, admissions interviewer, on-campus volunteer, and has been on alumni leadership boards in Seattle, DC, and now Los Angeles. It is my pleasure introducing USD graduate from 2012, Tom Roth.
Hey everyone, thank you, Brian, for that wonderful introduction. Happy to be here.
Yeah, how are we tonight, Tom?
Doing fine. I'm excited to have this conversation and hopefully answer a few questions, share a few philosophical thoughts, and more importantly, some practical tips.
Well, we appreciate your time and insight. So let's kick it off with this question. What was your mindset as a student at USD, and did you have any foresight to what you wanted to do?
Well, the short answer to that is no. I think that, like a lot of students, this is a pretty common experience to be going into your senior year and not knowing what comes next. You know, if the theme of the talk is sort of figuring out your vocation, and that process of discernment, that's really step one, is looking around and saying, you know, what am I called to do? You know, it's my senior year. You know, we were blessed at USD to have so many resources for, you know, career development, and whether intentionally or by accident, I kind of did a little bit of everything. You know, I visited the Career Center. I was part of the Student Alumni Association. You know, I talked to professors, but really there wasn't a whole lot of tangible things happening. And it was at an event, a Student Alumni Association event held in the Gary Center, that I met an alumni by the name of Paul Davis. And he was a terrific mentor to me the rest of my senior year. So somebody who was helpful, generous, offered a lot of resources. You know, it was through him that I got practice with interviewing, sort of some networking tips, resume review, that's important. And, you know, it's really my experience with Paul that kind of inspired me to stay involved at USD after graduation. He's an alum who he walks the walk, right? He volunteers and he helps out, he gives back. So that was pretty inspirational to me. At the same time I was getting to know Paul, I was talking to someone I'd gone to high school with, She was a year older than me, and she had a pretty cool job, or at least it looked like it. So I asked her and said, hey, that you travel, you do events, what's that about? And she said that she had heard about that job through, of all people, the librarian at our high school. I connected with that person, and then on their recommendation was able to interview at an organization called the Bureau of Education and Research based in the Seattle area, and ultimately got the job and was traveling the country 6 days a week most of the year doing events. It was a terrific job, and I loved it, and it was a great first job. But as you can imagine, that's a lot of travel. And I think stepping back, the lesson that I learned from that was you really, you don't know who from your life is going to make a recurring appearance. When I was 15, 16, 17 years old, I had no inkling that the high school librarian I would call them colleagues someday. And so that was a takeaway. I think the importance of that, maintaining those relationships is important. And to that end, another practical thing that I did that I think, I can't remember where I picked this up, probably from my parents. They're pretty big on thank you notes, was writing thank you notes. Emails are fine, phone calls are fine, texts are fine, but there's something to be said for that tangible letter in the mail. It really resonates, and it keeps those relationships alive. So if you make a point of, and this was my experience, of just as you go along, write down Paul's name, write down Taryn's name, write down Patty's name, and these are all people who helped me, and reach back and say thank you. That will kind of keep that going. And to kind of connect it back, this process of discernment, it's a big question to ask. What are you called to do? And oftentimes you break that down to smaller questions, and it's what am I able to do? As a young alum or a young graduate with not a whole lot of work experience, sometimes those options are fairly limited. The opportunities, they'll come along later, when you build up that experience. But I think it's also important, or it was for me, to kind of treat that as as step one. You're able to do something, but that might not necessarily be what you're called to do ultimately. And we all learn that lesson at different stages, but it's important to keep sight of that throughout.
Well, I want to kind of hammer home on this lesson alone. And I love the fact that, the handwritten notes learned so early in your career, because many of us start careers, right? We're on sprints, and whether that's the first year, second year, maybe leaking into the third year. I mean, we are always on this treadmill, it seems like, trying to learn as much as we can. Now, you mentioned relationships. So what specifics or how did you cultivate relationships that could have led to opportunities you haven't considered yet?
Yeah, I think that, overall, if I were to kind of put a headline on my experience thus far, limited as it is, it's, keeping an eye out for opportunities, because, as much as we try to steer and guide things, it's like sand through your fingers, the tighter you hold. So being flexible and that type of thing is important, and you'll find these connections oftentimes, like a story about reconnecting with the librarian from our high school, in unlikely places. And what kind of reflecting back makes me laugh a little bit is you travel all over the country and you meet all these people. And it was a gentleman named Lyle who worked in the office in Seattle, or in the Seattle area in Bellevue, who turned out to be sort of a pivotal person, somebody who was very important in my life. And Lyle moonlighted as an AV technician, and one day he asked, he put me on to an event that was coming to town. This was after I'd left BER. That was a 2.5 year job of 6 days a week travel. It's a lot. And so I was ready for the next chapter. Lyle reached out and said, hey, we got an event. I need, they need help. Are you available? I said yes. And I lent a hand over the course of a weekend for an event called a Returning Warrior Workshop. It's an event that the Navy Reserves put on for, as you might imagine, sailors coming back from deployment. So it's a weekend program for them. And I helped out. And on the third day of the program, the last day, I brought my resume and I just said, I gave it to Kelly, who was the manager of the event. And I said, if you're ever looking for event planners, I'm available, and DC, where their office was located, is one of the places I'm open to relocating to. And lo and behold, they were looking for an event planner. So just a couple months later, I was moving cross country to DC. And that's sort of where the next chapter begins. And it was because of, a conversation with somebody in the office, pretty crazy. I worked in that role, planning nonprofit, corporate, government events for about a year and a half. It's also pretty high octane. And what it taught me was the difference between an external event and an internal event. For those who maybe aren't necessarily that familiar with the nature of events, events put on by outside consultants, can sort of set up I don't want to call it a tension, but you're, as the planner, you're just not aware of all the priorities of the organization because you're not part of the organization. Realizing that drove me to the Cato Institute, and they are a nonprofit think tank in DC, and they were looking for an event planner. I was able to help them with fundraising events for about 3 years, and again, planning internal events. And just another aspect of that discernment, just sort of figuring out what aspects of your job or of your career appeal to you the most. I think that the common thread through all of this was I asked people for help a lot, and less as a philosophical matter, but as a practical one. If you make a point to ask people for help, it's very, it builds bonds. People like to be asked for their input and their expertise. And so by doing that, it might feel a little vulnerable, but what you're doing by that is, building those relationships. And of course, you're developing your professional skills. You're asking for someone to, hey, can you show me how to do this or how you do that? And you're learning from them. But, even more than that, you're building a personal relationship with them. I can't say enough about that. I think that through the whole experience moving to DC and starting a consulting job and then doing nonprofit work, I look back on it, and at every point in that transition, I would research flight schools. And I didn't really think anything of it at the time. It was more passive than anything. But now that I'm pursuing a career in aviation, I see that for what it was, which was really another step in discernment. It was me sort of looking closer and closer each time at, how long does this take? How much does it cost? How do you get started? And then I would sort of swing back in the other direction, back toward events. And I think that, in that I was asking myself, what's my vocation? But I was almost doing it within event planning and not realizing that I was actually called to something outside of events. And I think that too is a pretty common experience. It's maybe a little scary, to consider, am I in the wrong business? But I don't think it was so much a matter of being in the wrong business as it was, steps on the way to where I needed to be.
So on that note, and I'm going to ask a question from Jose Felix, and I hope I pronounced that name right. But first, he said, "Great job, Tom." So he's definitely into what you're saying. I think we all are. But most notable surprise throughout this process, what would that be? And then he also attached what you couldn't or can't really prepare for.
Yeah, the things you can't prepare for. Well, the last year and a half, 2 years has really laid bare, you can't prepare for everything. You know, if I were to turn the clock back to 2019, my significant other had gotten a job teaching at Pepperdine. We were living in DC. And so we knew that relocation to the LA area would be in our future. And we got together, sat down, and started coming up with a plan. And me being an event planner, I think I maybe put more thought into it than I maybe necessarily should have. I was holding on pretty tight. And plan A for me really was what a lot of people do, which is, you know, I'm going to keep this job I've got and I'm going to look for another job. Made more difficult because I'm looking in a market 3 time zones away. And then if that didn't work out, I was going to just move and just, you know, hit the street with my resume and try to find something. And if that didn't work out, plan C then was going to be flight school. Looking back, I wrote that down and I told myself that, but I don't think I actually thought that it would get to plan C. And in a way it didn't. You know, I got hired at an organization called After School All-Stars. They put on after school programs for kids nationwide, and they needed help with their fundraising events. So I, you know, was able to join up with them, and I moved in January 2020. And in March 2020, a lot happened. Mike Tyson quote, I love this quote, everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth. We all got collectively punched in the mouth in March 2020. And those who know the nature of nonprofits, it's dependent on the funding. The funding in this case is dependent on the programs, and the programs are dependent on schools being open. Well, schools aren't open, there's no programs, no funding. And within a matter of weeks, the organization had to cut 90% of the staff. So certainly unexpected, but having those plans served me well. You know, once you get over the initial shock of, you know, hey, you know, we got to let you go. And it ultimately ended up being the route that I took. So I think it's, you know, a bit ironic that it took the decimation of the entire events industry to get me moving in the right direction. But again, part of this discernment is completely outside of, you know, what we might plan for or expect. You know, I like to kind of look back on this, and if I were to try to share every lesson I learned in the last 2 years, it would be here all night. But having a plan's good, but having a backup plan's better. You know, write them down. That helps mapping things out. But even more specifically, and this is something that I picked up doing those Navy events when I worked at NCI in DC, is an exercise called red teaming. This is pretty common, I think, in a lot of big organizations and, you know, in the military and that type of thing. But it's really just taking an adversarial approach to your own plans, you know. So if you have a plan to change careers, write down what that's going to look like week by week, month by month, et cetera, the training involved, you know, what sort of certifications you're going to need to get, and then what they cost, how much goes into it, what's the time commitment, how much studying, how much are the materials. Just poke holes into every part of it that you can. And you're not doing it to try to, you know, set yourself up for failure. You're doing it to sort of set expectations. You know, going down the route of an aviation career, I discounted how slow the FAA moves. You know, you want pilots to be healthy while flying, and the medical review process is very lengthy. So I think you know, from the time that I made the conscious decision of I'm doing flight school, I'm going to pursue this career, to actually getting a medical clearance was about 5 months. And I didn't account for that when I started out. That's the type of thing that you can sort of clarify in your own plans if you do that type of red teaming exercise, which I think is pretty important. The last point about this, and I think is equally important, is, and I know there's sort of conflicting research on this. You'll find arguments on both sides, but I'm a big proponent of sharing your goals with people. You know, saying if there's some evidence that if you say your goals out loud to someone else. You tell somebody, hey, I'm going to start working out 3 days a week. You're going to maybe be more likely to do it. That was my experience. It was a big commitment to say that to people who are close to you. It was a big commitment to say to people who are close to me, hey, I'm not doing events anymore, and I am doing flight school. And that's, now you're committed. So I think there's something there. I think there's value in sharing your goals with other people.
I love that. Sometimes I get beat up by my wife because she thinks my ideas are goals, and I'm like, wait, they're just ideas right now. So hold on, let me write down the goal sheet. No, no, I think this is great, and I love your perspective because I think our generation was the first generation that would have multiple careers, right? And I remember being in the auditorium in Shiley and being told that, and we're like, wait, what? More than one. So let me ask you this: what's next for Tom Roth? Like, what does your next 5 to 10 years look like?
Yeah. Well, to that end, I've heard that idea sort of expressed in a way. It's the gone are the days of working 50 years and getting a gold watch. The irony is that I now work somewhere that sells gold watches. So, and they know it's a stepping stone on my way to another career, a career in aviation. So I'm what's next for me, I have the opportunity, and I'm blessed for this, to sort of combine passions, right? I work a few days a week at a local watch store, and I help them with their marketing and their photography. So I get to put those skills and interests to use. And then on the days I'm not at the store, I'm flying, I'm at flight school. I think that the next 5 to 10 years it can be hard to say. I think there's another point here, that there's value in not knowing what comes next, right? It's a big part of this process for me, and I would imagine for other people who are going through career changes, is just sort of embracing that uncertainty. I had a conversation one time, I referenced how during those stages of transition, I'd catch myself researching flight schools. This was during one of those times. I was talking to my next door neighbor, who was a retired gentleman, and he had a plane. He was a pilot, and I asked him for his perspective on it, and he said, kind of, a tough spot. You either learn to fly in the military, and they pay for you to become a pilot, or you do it in undergrad, and you combine an undergraduate degree with a pilot's license, or you do it when you're retired. And what about those 40, 50 years in the middle? It's a lot more tricky. What I've come to find out is there's as many paths to aviation in that middle period as there are pilots. Everyone takes a different path. And that's sort of been another aspect of learning to fly that, is unlike any other career experience I've had. I think we're pretty used to seeing things structured, and there's a clear path. I do the internship program, and then it, leads to A, B, C, D. There are a lot of things out there, entrepreneurial pursuits, and, aviation is another one where the path is less clear, and you really are blazing your own trail. So I think it's less about, telling yourself, oh, I am this kind of a person who's okay with that lack of structure. It's, I'm going to, if you, at least for me, because I am one of those people who likes the structure, and doing something unstructured is a little unfamiliar. I think it's a matter of looking at it and just saying, I'm going to do this the way that works for me, and, I'll get to my goal. I think it's an exciting opportunity for that reason. But the path to becoming a pilot is pretty varied. Right now, I'm pretty early on, but just to sort of help flesh this out a little bit, there's so many opportunities in aviation that are exciting that you'd never think of. I know a guy who just took a job working for an organization that flies transplanted organs. So organ comes out of the patient, and it needs to get where it's going immediately, and you need a pilot for that. So there's all kinds of opportunities. I'm excited to see where I am in 5 to 10 years.
I love that. Love that. I want to remind everyone who's tuning in to use the question and answer box if you have any questions for Tom as we get closer to the Q&A. So I have one last question. I'm going to kind of steal this from Lewis Howes. He on his podcast, The School of Greatness, he likes to ask a very provoking last question. So I'm going to kind of throw it to you. So if you, your possessions, your social media, everything documented, were all of a sudden gone, there was nothing left of you in terms of just the lessons and the teachings and everything you want to share, except for three truths or three things that you want us to know about you and what is important to career and career change. So I'm going to toss that to you. So what would be those three truths or three things that you would make sure people know if everything else was gone?
Yeah, that is a fun question to think about because I think so much of, well, I'll put it this way. The self-effacing joke that people in DC tell about themselves and each other is, the first question is, what do you do? And that sets up a little bit of a identity issue, doesn't it? Because it sort of presumes that what you do defines who you are. If there was nothing, if you were to strip all of that away, what would be left? I think that, three truths, and I'm going to qualify this remark and say that this is definitely with the audience in mind, because as it relates to career change and, the experience of graduating college and not knowing what comes next, or just pivoting in general, I think that it's another fun thought exercise to consider the fact that our degrees, if we have a college degree, actually appreciates over time. So when I graduated in 2012, USD was ranked 97th, I want to say, by US News and World Report. I checked yesterday and it's ranked 85th. So it's moved up 12 spots. And so at that pace, in about 50 years, we'll be number one. So we'll pass those chumps at Harvard and Yale. And our degree, our USD degree, is going to be more valuable than any other. So, but no, on a serious note, I mean, the fact that it appreciates is a pretty compelling reason to give back, right? And that importance of giving back. So to that end, we're here on an alumni event, and I'm going to sound like a bit of an evangelist to this end, but I think that's who I am on this topic. The alumni network is only as good as our involvement in it, and so I think that we owe a little bit of a debt to the current students and recent graduates to sort of lend our expertise and our connections and whatever help we can give, even if it's small. You think about how many students graduate from USD each year, and then how many people are in the alumni network. It's exponentially larger than the number of students currently at USD. So if you sort of think about it in the sense of, what could we create? What kind of opportunities could we create collectively by, lending a little bit of time back to those students at USD? I think that's pretty interesting. And finally, another sort of aspect of this, it's a 90-10 equation, right? 90% of the work has been done by the organizations, the people, the leadership involved with them, the Career Center, the Student Alumni Center, the companies that are doing on-campus recruiting. And the 10% is where we come in, right, of sort of giving back our time to USD, to volunteering. And it doesn't have to be big. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for just helping out once a year. And if everyone did that, we would see a lot of change. I know that there's a bunch of opportunities, but that 10% on our part is to reach out to USD and actually send the email and say, hey, I want to be a scholarship reader, or hey, can I get on the mailing list for the local chapter, the local alumni chapter? I want to go to an event. Those pay dividends. And, you know, if there's anything that's sort of a common thread through all this, it's like you never know who you're gonna meet and what kind of conversation you're gonna have, because it could lead you, you know, somewhere you didn't expect. Whether that's a universal truth or not, I think there is something in there to be said about, you know, giving back. And that's sort of been one of the more fulfilling things for me, and, you know, post USD life is staying involved through, you know, a variety of ways with the Student Alumni Association, working with students, you know, helping students, you know, who have questions about getting their first job. If that sounds like you know, reach out to the alumni organization locally and get involved.
I love that. I love that. So we're gonna transition to the Q&A. We have a couple questions coming in, but I would like to start with a very specific question that someone submitted while they registered. Okay, so this is a little wordy, but I'm gonna do it in its entirety just to respect the question. Okay. So due to a restructure in our company, I was moved out of the marketing department where I had been for 15 years in a product group. I still work on marketing strategy, but I'm at a crossroads of whether I continue down the path of product marketing or get back to marketing communications, which I am now realizing was my first true passion. When you're having these kinds of realizations, do I make the most of the position I'm in to find the enjoyable work, or do I find a new position, potentially leaving the company?
Yeah, I'll use this as an opportunity for another qualifying statement, which is I still consider myself a recent grad. And, you know, to that end, my experience is going to be much different than everyone here, you know, participating tonight. What sort of jumps out when I hear that is, you know, about the passion, right? And, you know, I think that speaking for myself, there's passions of mine that it's like in a perfect world, I would love to be able to make a living doing that. But it's just, you know, that's not the world we live in. What I think is kind of exciting when I hear that question is the passion, at least in a professional sense, is something that they've already done. You know, they've already kind of gone through that process of proving, yeah, this is something that I can do and I can, you know, make a living doing. And yeah, 15 years, it's a long time. You know, leaving your company after being there a while is a scary proposition. I'm sure there's people here who know more about that than me. But I would, you know, I think that what this really drives at is, you know, a matter of discernment, and is what you're doing sustainable for yourself, but also how does it serve the people around you? That's another important aspect of discerning what is important. You know, what are you called to do? Is, you know, can this provide you know, benefit for the people important to you, the people who rely on you? And I think that there's a lot of hope in that question because, like I said, they've already kind of proved to themselves that this is an opportunity that has worked out in the past. It's just a matter of getting back to it. You know, there's challenges for sure, but I'm hopeful for, you know, what the outcome could be there.
Okay, another question. Well, there's a series of questions that I'm kind of clumping in just because it's all kind of like-minded. So when you do have career change, how do you show that on a resume, or how do you approach that in an interview question? How do you explain your pivots and the maneuvering of you know, having responsibility to a loved one and their career decisions versus you know, dealing with career change that a pandemic forces you into?
Yeah, one of the people in my life who's been the most helpful in answering these types of questions when I've asked them is my aunt. She spent her whole career, she's retired now, but she spent her whole career working in HR. And she has some of the best stories of anyone I know, as you might imagine, but she also has some of the best answers and to things like this. And I think one of the pieces of advice that she gave me is, a resume, when you're trying to communicate something, don't make it too hard to interpret. If it's a matter of, I want to pursue a new career or a career in this new field, put that right up top. Say that, I had this experience. It's like a header. Yeah. It's like a couple sentences at the top of the resume, almost like a statement, just something that somebody can scan and read and get a sense of what comes down the page. It provides context, and don't make it too hard to discern what you're trying to say. Again, use your resources, other people, hand it to a couple people and say, hey, does this make sense? Here's what I'm trying to say. Is that what you get from reading this? And if it's a matter of, I spent 15 years working in, this product group, but I want to get, over to marketing strategy because I was successful with that in the past. It's fine to just say that. I mean, yes, we're living in an era when a lot of resumes are screened by software, but eventually someone is going to read that. And if they can't make sense of what you're trying to communicate, that's where it might end. I think there's a lot to be said for kind of that clarity of communication. And we also can get bogged down quite easily in like corporatese, the inside speak. And that's fine if you're, sort of tailoring your resume to get through the filters, the LinkedIn, the Glassdoor, the monster.com filters. You might need to include some of those words. But when it comes to a sentence that somebody's going to read and needs to make sense of, it needs to be readable. So I think there's value in that.
Well, we're getting close to our end time. So this is kind of the last call for questions. I'm going to clump in another group of questions that have come in both registration and or through the Q&A. How do you infuse confidence in students and in their career decisions, whether it is searching for the degree to match the passion or searching out a decision that they have to make in circumstance?
I would say that it's, our experiences, this is a bit of a tautology, our experiences are our experiences. The worst you can do is include them, if you're applying for jobs, put them on a resume. You never know what might resonate with the person reading it. I had somebody tell me once, there's a point at which, you don't need to put your high school on your resume anymore. You don't need to put your first job on your resume anymore. It's not relevant. But then I had another sort of conflicting piece of advice, which was, if you have membership in an organization, like say you were an Eagle Scout, always include it, because maybe there'll be an Eagle Scout reading it, or maybe you used to be a lifeguard and you just have a line in there that says, you were a lifeguard. Who knows? Maybe the person reading your resume might sort of latch onto that. Maybe in their estimation, that tells them something about you. So I think that it's a bit of a trap to discount our own experiences. And even if they're limited, even if you're just going for your first job out of college and you don't have a lot of career experience, or you're moving into a new field and you have zero experience in that field, if you share what you do have experience in, the people who are doing the hiring, they might be able to make those connections between your experience and their needs better than you can. The worst that can happen is they say no, and you keep trying. I mean, I think we've all had that experience of throwing our resume into the black hole and seeing if anything comes back. There's nothing wrong with just trying. I think that the advice is I would give it to, I should say that, students at USD who I've worked with and who are going through their first job search. It's just a matter of being being honest, right? And then being exact. If you're precise and you can quantify what your experiences are, that can be a little bit hard if you're, say, a lifeguard. I saved 100 lives one summer. Good job. Maybe be going for a EMS career. But in all seriousness, if you can sort of put a number on what you're trying to convey, that might sort of help define what you're trying to communicate. So that's another practical thing that someone shared with me that I've tried to include, and I think it's, it certainly can't hurt.
Well, I just want to acknowledge you, Tom. I am speaking for our entire chapter, but also everyone who is logged in and speaking a little bit from the mothership. USD is thank you for being an alumni. Thank you for being who you are, and then obviously the lessons that you've learned along the way. Because I definitely agree that your story is your story, and so own the story, right? And I think no matter what, when you tell your story, people will understand truth and they'll understand movement and mindset as you explain it. So we definitely want to thank you for your time and thank you for your insight. How can people get in touch with you if they want to do any follow-up conversations or follow-up questions? What's the easiest way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an open book. You can find me very easily on LinkedIn. If I'm lucky, I might have even made it onto the LA Torero Club page. Who knows? But yeah, I'm there, and Tom Roth photo on Instagram if that's your thing. But be prepared for a lot of artsy photos. But yeah, get in touch. I love working with students. I love working with any alums. I love talking about USD, and if it's a matter of getting involved, again, just reach out to me or to USD, because there's a lot of students who are going through a lot of weird times these last couple of years, and they can benefit from what we know from our expertise. So if we're generous with it, we're going to build the alumni network. It's going to be a good thing.
That's great. Well, thank you, Tom. And as I bring Megan back, I just want to, on behalf of our board leadership and our chapter, thank you for tuning in. And we look forward to connecting at a first in-person event coming here soon. Megan?
Thank you so much, Tom and Brian. What a wonderful conversation. I mean, I think Tom nailed it when he mentioned, it's all about relationships, right? You never know who you're going to meet down the line. And that's what we tell people all the time through the USD Alumni Association. We provide opportunities such as today or networking events, things like that, for alumni to connect, to meet whoever they meet that might help them down the line. So we hope, as Tom mentioned, that you do get involved, that you have an opportunity to check out our website and see what opportunities we have, either locally or through affinity groups, or just general USD Alumni Association offerings that we have, because there's a lot to be involved with. Speaking of being involved, on the screen you will see a list of upcoming events that we have. They are both a mixture of virtual and in person. And so you'll see on here just a plethora of really wide-ranging events to participate in. We have a hike coming up on Saturday in Marin. We have the annual OC Tacos and Cervezas event, a spotlight, a couple of spotlights on our individuals who are part of affinity groups such as FUSO and LAND and things like that. We also have some cybersecurity virtual opportunities, how to make backcountry truffle if you're interested in that. And then the last thing I'll say is Brian had mentioned coming together as an LA community. For those who are in LA who joined the call or who are watching at a later time, we do have the first in-person event for the LA community in over 2 years coming up on December 5th. It's Sunday, December 5th. It's at Rosenthal's Wine Garden and Patio in Malibu, and it should be a really nice afternoon just to get together to celebrate the holidays and to see one another once again in person. So we hope that you'll be able to join, or we hope that you'll be able to join us for that. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tom. We are so grateful to have alumni like you come out of the University of San Diego and continue to be involved. And to everyone who joined tonight, thank you so much. We will send a follow-up email with some more information for you, but feel free to reach out whenever you like. We hope you have a great rest of your day and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.